So, what makes you, you? It's one of the biggest questions we can ask, right? For literally centuries, thinkers and scientists have been trying to crack the code of human personality, to find a system that explains why we are the way we are. We're going to go on that journey and see how the science evolved, from putting people into simple boxes to mapping the complex, unique dimensions that make us who we are.
It all kind of starts with a question we've all heard a million times. Are you an introvert or an extrovert? And we love these labels, don't we? They feel so simple and clear. But, as we're about to find out, the real science of personality shows us that these simple labels might be hiding a much more interesting and way more accurate story.
Okay, so this is the absolute key to the whole thing. It's this fundamental split between two ways of thinking, types versus traits. The old school approach was all about types. Think of it like a light switch. You're either on or off. You're in this box or you're in that one. But the modern scientific approach uses traits, which are way more like a dimmer switch. It's a spectrum, and we all fall somewhere along that line. And trust me, that shift from types to traits, it changed everything.
To really get why this shift was such a big deal, we got to look back at the old way of doing things, just sorting people into these neat little categories. And it's an idea that's been around for, well, thousands of years.
And believe it or not, this types idea goes way, way back. The ancient Greek physician Hippocrates thought your personality was dictated by the balance of 4 fluids in your body, the humors. Too much blood, you were cheerful. Too much black bile, you were sad. This theory stuck around for centuries, but, needless to say, we now know it's, well, completely baseless.
Let's fast forward a couple thousand years to the 20th century. You get William Sheldon's theory that your body type actually determined your personality. But once again, it ran into the exact same problem. Most of us just aren't one single body shape. We're a mix, and we just don't fit neatly into one of these boxes.
And that brings us right up to today, with super popular systems like the Myers-Briggs. Look, tons of people find it useful, but it gets the same criticism from scientists. It forces you into a category. It labels you an introvert or an extrovert, for example. But the scientific view is that these aren't boxes, they're spectrums. And it's much more accurate to describe where you fall on that spectrum.
So, all this dissatisfaction with putting people in boxes really sparked a scientific revolution. Psychologists decided, okay, instead of trying to create the boxes, let's just map the dimensions themselves. And that, right there, is the trait approach. So, where in the world do you even begin? Well, back in the 1930s, a psychologist named Gordon Allport had a pretty wild idea. He went to the dictionary, and he painstakingly cataloged every single word in the English language that could possibly describe a personal trait. And what did he find? 17,953 of them. Yeah, it's an insane list, but it was the crucial first step.
All right, so how do you get from almost 18,000 words down to something useful? Well, with a lot of science. After Allport made his list, researchers like Cattell used this cool statistical technique called factor analysis. It's basically a fancy way of seeing which words tend to cluster together. Like, if you're described as sociable, you're probably also described as active and talkative. These clusters hinted at something deeper, the real fundamental building blocks of our personality.
And this whole scientific process, which took decades, finally led to what is now the gold standard in personality psychology, the 5-factor model, or as pretty much everyone calls it, the Big Five. And it's a game changer, not just because it's based on data, but because it works across different cultures and can actually help predict real-life outcomes, from how you'll do at your job to your general happiness.
So the Big Five gives us 5 massive dimensions that basically cover the whole spectrum of human personality. The key idea isn't which box you're in, but where you score on each of these 5 traits. And to make it really easy to remember, we use the acronym OCEAN. Let's just quickly break down what each of those letters means.
First up, O is for openness to experience. If you score high here, you're probably curious, imaginative, love trying new things. If you score low, you're more practical, you like your routines, and you stick to what you know.
Next, C is for conscientiousness. This is all about how organized and disciplined you are. High scores are super dependable, hardworking, the people you can always count on. Low scores tend to be a bit more impulsive, spontaneous, and maybe a little disorganized. And here's the one we all know. E for extraversion. This is really about where you get your energy from. High scorers, the extroverts, feel recharged by being around other people. They're sociable and active. Low scorers, the introverts, get their energy from quiet time alone. Then we have A, for agreeableness. This one's pretty straightforward. It's about how you tend to interact with others. If you score high, you're probably compassionate, trusting, and a real team player.
Low scores can be a bit more cynical and competitive.
And last but not least, N is for neuroticism, which is just a fancy term for emotional stability. Someone who scores high is more likely to feel things like anxiety and insecurity. Someone who scores low is generally more calm, even-keeled, and secure.
So there you have it. The Big Five gives us this incredible scientific map of our inner worlds. But just when you think the story's over, there's one final, really important twist that makes it all make sense. So back in the late 1960s, a psychologist named Walter Mischel basically dropped a bombshell on the whole field. He argued that, hey, how we act has way more to do with the situation we're in than our inner personality. Even a super honest person might lie in a very specific circumstance. This kicked off a huge argument that became known as the person-situation debate.
So, who won the debate? Well, turns out they were both kind of right. Today, the general consensus is that our behavior is really a dynamic dance between our personality and the situation we're in. Your traits are like your default settings, your general tendencies. But the specific context you're in has a huge say in what you actually do from moment to moment.
And that leaves us with one last big question to think about. What defines you more? The stable, consistent person you are on the inside, or the flexible person who adapts to whatever the world throws at you? The real answer, it seems, is that you're a beautiful, complicated mix of both.